Okay, and we are live. Hello, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to the Healing Element podcast. I'm so honored and to have my special guest with me here today. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and I couldn't think of a better person to have this conversation with. So my special guest today is Tamara Hill. And I want to make sure that I have all of your credentials outlined because that's very important. That shows the expertise that you bring to this conversation and how committed you are to doing the work. So MS, NCC, CCTP, LPC is a licensed therapist and internationally certified clinical trauma therapist in private practice who specializes in working with children and adolescents who suffer from mood disorders, trauma, and disruptive behavioral disorders. She also provides international consultations and works with some young and older adults struggling with grief and loss or life transition. Hill strives to help clients to realize and actualize their strengths in their home environments and in their relationships with the community. She credits her career passion to a divine calling and is internationally recognized for corresponding literary works as well as appearances on radio and other media platforms. She is an author, family consultant, keynote speaker, and founder of Anchor Child and Family Counseling. Welcome to the podcast. Such an honor to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And so you and I, and I should say what we're talking about. I just wanted to jump right in. So those that are joining, our topic today is managing your mental health and building resiliency during the holidays. And today we're going to learn tips on how we can manage our mental and emotional well-being during this holiday season. And this episode is really tailored for those that have experienced recent loss, and maybe now you're dealing with, we're coming up to the holiday season and you don't have that loved one that you typically would spend time with. Or maybe it's just, you lost a loved one months ago, years ago, and you never grieved. And now for some reason with COVID and everything else going on, it's really starting to have an impact on you. So our conversation today is, there's a lot of depth to it. And we just want to make sure that we're holding space. So if anyone that is listening, watching, feel free to jump right in the comment section. We want to hear from you. If you have any questions, please, this is meant to be a space that we can work through challenges that you may be experiencing during this time. And so with that being said, I first saw Tamara on the Philippe Matthews program. And
that was a long time ago.
Yeah. And so Philippe always says, like, "Kai, are you like going through all the people that I've interviewed?" And I'm like, "Wow, you have such great guests." And so the topic that you were talking about was regarding intergenerational trauma and how trauma is passed on. And I just thought you did a great job of breaking it down in a way that was digestible, that I could understand. Someone that a lot of that content was new to me. And so at that point I said, oh my goodness, like I really appreciated the work that you were doing. And then this was like years later that I started up my podcast, but I kept watching the episodes and following you on YouTube or subscribe to your YouTube channel. And then this year when I started my business, we had a conference in which you were one of the panelists on there. So that was a treat to have you on there as well. This is just like so awesome now that to have you on the podcast. I'm excited to have you.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you. So sweet of you too. I love all the praise. Like that's like taking my nerves down on like a lot.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And because this is a very, this topic that we're talking about today, a lot of people are probably going to really be touched by it because, right now we're dealing with financial issues as well, with that's kind of insecurity of what's going on with my job or my unemployment. So in the midst of all of that, life still goes on in other areas. And so we just wanted to have this conversation today to say, listen, we know that there's a lot going on, right? In addition to maybe you have lost a loved one. And these are the things that you'll be going through. So what I really appreciate that we're going to do today is that we're first going to go over the signs that you're struggling with, you're struggling emotionally and psychologically with that loss, right? So now we're coming towards Thanksgiving. If that's what you celebrate, we're coming towards the seasonal holidays. I'll just put it that way. And so this could be a very challenging time. So what Tamara's going to do,
especially this year. I have to throw that in there.
Yeah, no. So I definitely would like you to, of course, you can even speak to that, and then we can jump into the points about what you have observed during this year, especially.
Oh my God. So I don't even know where to begin. It's like, do I begin personally? Do I go like globally? I just think this year has been just completely emotionally and psychologically draining. And it has taken a lot of internal strength, I think, for us to get through this. Like, we have never been in a time like this before in our lives. Like, I don't remember in our history ever being made to wear a mask at all times. Like, this is so different for us. And then, there's financial hits and losses because of this. There's emotional and psychological strain. We have psychological trauma, not to mention the own trauma that we're going through in our own personal lives, aside from COVID and what's going on in the world. So we've got a ton of things to try to juggle. And I know for you guys, whoever's watching, and for me as well, just trying to go to bed at night takes a lot of energy in and of itself, because I've got so much on my mind personally and just in the world, that it's really hard to get in bed and lay down and put your mind on pause so you can sleep. Like, your thoughts are just constantly, and then you start to feel the physiological effects of all of that. You start having headaches, you start getting nauseous, anxious, heart rate goes up. So there's a lot that we're dealing with just in general this year. I've never seen a year like this. This is very, very different.
I totally agree with that. And I think also, we have the 24 hours news cycle, right? And then if you go on social media, you're having like the COVID-19 alerts. Like, so if you go on Facebook, you're getting those notifications. Then if you go to Instagram, you're also getting the notification. So you are constantly bombarded with, and the other part too, so you're constantly bombarded with like the COVID-19 information, right? When then you have to sort through to figure out, okay, what, do I believe this? Do I not believe it? And then I think it was CNN that they kept a tally of people that were dying. And I was just like, why are we doing, yes. I get it, but it's also was kind of like, I think that's a bit much right now. Like, we're all dealing with so much to keep like this running tally. I thought that was a bit much to kind of see that running while you're getting information about this pandemic.
Oh my God, yes. Can I also say too, when you click on Twitter or you click on YouTube, there's something on there also. So it's like, well, gee, I'm here trying to watch something so I can go to bed at night. And now I'm looking at the news. One night I got in bed, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to turn on YouTube and watch something funny, and I'm going to go to sleep. And I ended up watching this whole interview about COVID. And I'm like, why am I doing this? So you can't even go to YouTube or Twitter or even LinkedIn and have peace of mind. It's there.
Right. And so because everyone's been so bombarded by it, right? So then if you go outside, then you have the signs. So it's just kind of, you never have an escape from it. And usually when we go through challenging times, sometimes there's like some type of escape, somewhere we can go to just kind of say, relax. Like, maybe your thing is getting a mani-pedi, maybe it's getting a massage, but now it's like, I have to wear the face mask. Like, is this establishment safe? Am I going to catch anything if I lay on this table for my massage? Like, your body still can't relax because there's still this heightened sense of that you have because we're living in the midst of a pandemic.
Absolutely. Can you imagine what people go through who have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, right? And they're really struggling with obsessions of germs and disorganization and catching something. And then even the compulsions of just like hand sanitizer. Like I have a kiddo right now, her hands are so chapped because all she does is hand sanitizer. So, I mean, all the stress from COVID this year has triggered mental health concerns a great deal.
Yes, and that is why we wanted to have this conversation today, because we know that sometimes we don't even know who to go to, where to go, and so this is a platform that people that are joining, be sure to drop a comment if you have any questions that you have or concerns, or just want to share your experience. We definitely want to hear that as well. So as I said in the beginning, what we're going to do is just kind of go through. These are some key pointers that Tamara had put together for us, and so we're going to go through those. So the first, we're going to talk about our signs that you're struggling emotionally and psychologically with that loss. Again, talking about losing someone. Now it's around the holidays. Again, it doesn't have to be recent. Maybe with everything going on now, you are grieving, and that loss could have happened 20 years ago, but it feels like it happened yesterday. And so first sign is reenactment, and then I guess we can just kind of flow from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can explain reenactment, and I can also explain like the stages of grief as well, if that would be helpful.
I think so, for sure.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'll start there, and then I'll go back to reenactment. Okay. So I'll give you a little bit of personal information. My grandmother passed away this past April. It wasn't from COVID. She had a series of health complications that just immediately hit her. And my family and I had been taking care of her since, let's see, January, February, March, and then she passed away in April. One of the things that I saw my family go through, and it happened really fast, because sadly, my grandmother, she had sepsis. So it was like a slow, kind of painful death over the course of so many weeks. And I'm going to try not to look at this comment box because I see a couple of things. I'm getting distracted. Sorry, guys. I recognized that the stages of grief had hit my family sooner than I thought. I thought it was going to take a little bit of time. The first stage of grief, and this is a stage that, you're likely to go through at the very beginning, but you can also revisit it at a later time as well. And that's denial. And denial is basically not always it didn't happen or this death did not happen. Denial can sometimes just be it didn't happen the way that it happened. That could also be a part of that first stage of grief. And I think that's kind of what I was going through with my own grandmother when she was sick and not doing very well. I just couldn't really wrap my mind around the way that it was happening. So my denial centered around, oh, it's not that bad. She'll get better. It's not that bad. She'll get sick and she'll do like most people. She'll go to the hospital. She'll get better. She's coming back home. And it never happened. So that was denial. And then I also saw my family go through depression and anger. That's the third stage. So depression is the second stage. Anger is the third. And then bargaining is the fourth stage. And that's kind of what I saw some of my family members doing. It was kind of like a silent prayer of God, if you just let her get better, if you just let her walk out of that hospital, I promise I'm going to be better, or I promise I'm going to serve you better. So that's an example of bargaining. And then the last stage of that we typically have a hard time arriving at is acceptance. And a lot of people do not get there. And if they do, it's later in life after they have fully accepted that loss has occurred. So those are the 5 stages of grief: denial, depression, anger, bargaining, and acceptance. So if you guys have any questions about that, just please send them to us, because those stages are really difficult to get through, especially the denial piece. And the denial piece can really keep you numb. So I welcome your questions on that. But Kai, let me go ahead into reenactments. What can happen during this time, and especially holiday time, is you may find yourself in a situation where you are beginning to behave in the ways that you behaved in a previous experience that you are traumatized by. Does that make sense? So there's like a previous experience that you have had, and you are now acting or behaving in that same way in your current situation. So if you have a very poor family dynamic and there's poor communication and you're struggling, there's a high chance, I'll put it that way, there's a high chance that you could reenact that dynamic in your current situation. So that would be reenactments, Kai.
Sorry, I'm on mute.
Okay.
I put myself on mute to help with the, and when that happens, when there is the reenactment, that happens, you're not really conscious of what's going on. Is it something that maybe you have suppressed that's now coming up that you are now trying to cope, trying to deal with at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I recognize, like, I have a family right now who's dealing with reenactments, and it's really difficult because what's happening is they're being triggered by the holiday in and of itself. They've had a history of very poor communication and dynamics during holiday time, and even though they're in a healthier spot, that entrenched or that really complicated dynamic they've created between them, it just gets reenacted every holiday, and it's really difficult for them to have a peaceful holiday because the dynamic is such a mess. They're just reenacting how they used to be in the past, and it's a place where you can really get stuck. You can't get out of that mindset. It's not easy.
Wow. So is it almost like they're continuing to go through that grieving process? Are they continuously going through it like it kind of like it just happened?
Yes, absolutely. That's one way to look at that. It's almost like a re-experiencing of a previous situation that was really bad. You're taking the emotions, the thoughts, the behaviors from the past, and you're bringing that into your now. That's really the best way I can explain that. And you're almost tainting the current situation with the past.
Wow. And so I can imagine someone who is doing that, the anxiety that they may feel when the holiday's approaching, because you're reliving that. So you're probably going to feel the anxiety and everything, in addition to going through the whole grieving process all over again. So that can just leave the holidays as a very stressful time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the next point you have is re-experiencing of trauma. Can you go into what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think because it's, holiday time is really for families, everything is commercialized to include families. If you've lost a loved one, like I have, like you have, and probably those who are watching the podcast as well, all of that commercialism, even Christmas music, even certain sights and smells can trigger thoughts of the funeral. It could also trigger thoughts of that person when they were alive. My mom and I was a little bit defensive. I'll share this. No, I'm usually a private person, but I will share this on your show because I think I love your show. So I'm going to share it here. My mom and I were talking last week, and she's like, I just feel like I need to get this off my chest. And I'm like, Mom, I don't want to go back into grandma's death. I can't. And she's like, well, I have to get this out. And so we talked, and I realized that she had things that she wanted to share, and I had things I needed to share. And that was because I think we were both being triggered to re-experience all that pain and that trauma and that grief and that loss just because of holiday time, because this is my grandmother's favorite holiday. So we were re-experiencing all those emotions from the funeral, all those emotions, all that denial, all that grief, all that pain, all over again. And that can happen for a lot of people.
And that makes so much sense, because it could be maybe the meal, like the favorite meal, or where someone would sit at the table. And so, right. So then if everyone's sitting at the table and then that seat used to be reserved for someone, right there, that experience, because this is a new experience that you're having. So all of that, the reality of what has the dynamics of the family has changed, it kind of hits again. It's always like those different experiences that it's that reminder of the reality of the changes that have now happened within the family.
Absolutely. And the really scary part about re-experiencing as well, Kai, is, it can really trigger a physiological response. It can trigger, anxiety. It can trigger depression. We have, and I talk a lot about this on my YouTube channel, we have two very important systems that really is the foundation of trauma. And that's this is a little bit of science, guys, that it's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is the gas pedal. And that's kind of when our heart rate goes up, our thoughts begin to race, we start to sweat, we start to feel like we're in panic mode. And then we have that parasympathetic nervous system, which is like that brake system. That's when we're calming down, almost like the high you feel when you're having a panic attack, and then once you finally calm down, that's the parasympathetic, the brake system kicking in. Those are two really important systems. And that's the foundation of trauma. When we have had a loss, when we've dealt with grief, we're used to being in that sympathetic gas pedal nervous system mode. And it's really hard to calm down and relax and really get a grip. So, this time of year, even re-experiencing can trigger that sympathetic nervous system arousal. You're going to have most likely all of those emotions and thoughts and physiological sensations you had at the time of that loss.
Wow. And when you say that, it reminded me of when I used to teach yoga when I was living in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I was able to teach because of this organization provided therapy for the community, and they also combined it with restorative yoga. So I provided the yoga part of it, and there was a therapist that was working with different people in the community. Now, it was open to anybody, anybody who needed therapy could come for free, but they focused on people that lost someone through violence. And so the folks that came to the sessions, the age range, like I had some teenagers, and then I had some young adults, and then older adults. I mean, up to, I think probably it's people that were in like their 50s and 60s. And some of these people, they lost someone years ago, but never grieved, never really talked about it. And so as they started to go have therapy, and after therapy, they would come and do a restorative yoga session with me, so many of them would say, they would come back for our next session, because it was a weekly session that we would do. And they would say, oh my God, I'm sleeping better. Because all of that emotion, anxiety, and everything, they were carrying that around for years. So it was affecting their sleep. It was affecting their physical body. And so many of them were able to, even the flexibility was returning, just because they were starting to release through going to therapy, and also settling in their body and knowing that it's safe to settle in your body. It's okay to do that. They were also connecting to those emotions. It was amazing to see that. But when you said kind of reliving that, they were holding all of that in for years.
Oh my God, yes. And can you imagine people, Kai, that can't open up, or they haven't been given the opportunity to open up? Like your knowledge of yoga and your classes allow people to open up, but for a lot of people, they either have learned to internalize as a defense mechanism, or they've learned to internalize because their culture or their environment says, nope, don't talk about it. Or they can't open up. There's no one to open up to. So, having your classes, I think, are fantastic. And if you were in Pittsburgh, I'd bring you on and seriously.
I would love to.
Oh my God, I would love it, because I have so many kiddos who are just like, they are like pinned up with anxiety, because they don't have the outlet to say, hello, I'm hurting.
Right. It's so true. And one other bit I just wanted to add to that, because in the class, at first people were kind of like, what is she doing? Because I had like my essential oils. So they were a little like, what does that smell?
Just I would grab my mat. I'm out of here.
You're like, what is that smell?
What's the oil for?
Exactly. And so after they began to realize, especially I had a few younger folks there when they were like teenagers, and they're like, what is that smell? But then they got used to it. It's like, that's lavender, and that can kind of help you relax. And so they're like, really? So much of what they were learning in the yoga class, they were also combining that with therapy. They were taking these tools home and realizing that, you know what, I'm not this angry person. Like, an experience happened to me, something traumatic happened to me that I've never shared with anyone. But now I have these tools to know that I am not an angry person. I am experiencing something that made me feel a certain way. And so that is so that's why when you said having that conversation, speaking, it's so important, or else you have all of this bottled up emotion inside of you, and it can come out in different ways. And sometimes you depending on how much, you may not be able to control it. Would you agree to that?
Oh, 100%. I think, you know how we usually say around holiday time, there's Scrooges around,
Yes.
They're just like irritable and just like really snappy.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, as I matured and I grew up in the world and became a psychotherapist, I realized, wait a minute, maybe they're like that because something bad happened. Maybe they're not just irritable during this time just because they're evil, mean people who don't want to have fun and be happy. Maybe something terrible happened to them and they don't have an outlet.
Mm-hmm. That's so true, because it's easy to dismiss it and say,
It
oh,
is.
so-and-so's angry. They're always cranky. And so that goes into the next point that you brought up, was declining in mental health. So instead of just kind of throwing out a phrase of they're angry and just being dismissive, I like what you have here is, let's look at the mental health. How's the holiday season impacting someone that way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I see clients in my practice during holiday time, I tried to teach them to almost see their symptoms in threes. So an example of that would be, okay, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating well, and I'm irritable. There's three things right there that says my mental health is declining. Something's going wrong here. If that's not it, then maybe another example of that would be, I'm crying a lot, I'm isolating, and I don't want to be bothered with people. There's something else. So I teach my clients, try to look at your symptoms or some of the things you're doing in threes. What are three things that are happening to you now that's a potential sign of declining mental health? And that really seems to help them highlight, even to me when they come in, okay, something's wrong here. One of my adolescents came in the other day and she says, Miss Tamara, I don't know what's going wrong with me, but something's going wrong. I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, and I'm snapping at everyone. She says, and I knew then something was wrong. My mental health was declining. So sometimes it is helpful to look at it that way. If I have three things going wrong here, maybe that's a sign.
Right. And I like what you said, because your clients going to you, they can now put language to what they're experiencing. Yes. And so it's no longer just being dismissed. It's like, okay, let's take a deeper dive into what's going on and help you explain. And then that can lead that conversation to, oh my gosh, around the holidays, this is when I lost so-and-so. So I love that, to dig deeper. And then when you get to the root cause, that's when the healing can start to take place.
I agree. I think once you gain that personal insight and you can say, okay, I'm not doing well, my mental health is declining, I'm re-experiencing that loss, that pain, I think that's when you can build and you can get to a place of healing. But you have to have, I personally think you have to have that personal insight so that you can move there to healing. If you lack that insight, you can't really heal, because you don't know what you don't know what you're trying to heal at that point.
Exactly. And we kind of touched upon the sleep part a little bit, but you also said another kind of key here is the sign that there may be some struggle there is poor sleep and appetite.
Absolutely. So those are two essential things that we need to function on a daily basis. If you're not eating and you're not sleeping, I think those are two signs there that something's going awry. Something needs to be paid attention to. If you're not eating, you're not getting nutrients, you're not getting energy, you're not getting the thing that keeps your body going.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to cause other things to decline, your energy, your mood, and sometimes it can start to show up physically also. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I have, lost my appetite, I'm going to start losing weight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start looking really exhausted. Couple months ago when my grandmother passed away, I wasn't really eating all that well, and I could see the toll it was taking on my face. Like I had bags and I just didn't look really all that well. So when you're not eating and you're not sleeping, those are signs something's up.
Right, right. And so, and, for those that are listening, maybe, this is information that you can share with a friend or a person that's kind of like in your circle of something that they are going through, just so they know that they're not alone, and that, and these are key signs that you can see, not that you have to make a diagnosis, but if you start to see a pattern of these things in a friend's life, that maybe, it's time for them to seek therapy and just to start to put some language to what they're going through so that they can begin their healing process. And so, of course, because of poor sleep and appetite, that can lead to unexpected weight loss or fluctuation in weight. So you did touch upon that. And the other is dissociation.
Yeah.
So that interesting, because I was reading about depression and anxiety, of how, just diving into more how yoga can be helpful for that. And I also saw this kind of pop up, the disconnect that can happen. Please do share with us how that looks and the meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people go through dissociation more than they realize. I think I like to look at dissociation on a spectrum. So we've got, mild, moderate, severe, and we've got some things in between. So I think most people mildly dissociate when they're daydreaming. That's really what it is. Moderate dissociation may be an example of this. Maybe I'm driving from point A to point B and I can't tell you what stop sign I hit because I just wasn't tuned in, And I'm sure a lot of people experience that. And then we've got, the other dissociation where it's a little bit on the more severe end of this, where we have such diagnoses such as dissociative identity disorder, where we really detach from reality. And we kind of have a separate world that we're operating in because different pieces of who we are is fragmented. But let me go back a little bit. I kind of jumped ahead. Dissociation, for definition, is really just pulling away from reality. So here's reality. This is you. You're pulling away from that. And that can be unintentional, especially when you're under stress, when you're suffering from grief, or if you're dealing with some kind of traumatic loss or even PTSD. You can pull away from reality in such a way that you're not aware of what's going on around you.
Wow.
Sometimes that's a defense mechanism to pain as well.
Wow. And so with that, the next point that you mentioned is the isolation and withdrawal, which I can see how that can just fall in line. And so does that mean that if there is a family gathering, maybe the person kind of doesn't want to go, staying to themselves, maybe not speaking much during the holiday season? Is that kind of how it would be shown?
Yes, I think hiding away in a bedroom while there's people in your living room, that's isolation and withdrawal. Or it could really just be, okay, I'm in this gathering with my family, and yet I'm so far away. Like I'm not here. And so to me, that's a form of withdrawal and isolation. You're not emotionally and psychologically present.
Wow. And tearfulness and anxiety.
Yeah.
So is that, again, that you're reliving the experience again, as if, the loss recently happened?
Yes, absolutely. So let's say you are re-experiencing, you might have so many days after where you are tearful and you're crying and you're breaking down, shutting down, you're isolating, and you're also irritable. You can be very irritable as well.
Wow. And then of course, all of this, you can see how it builds on each other. You know, if you're feeling isolated, withdraw, again, that can affect your eating, how you're eating, that can affect your sleeping. Like you can just see that there's a cycle that can start to develop. So it's not as though, you know, pointing out one thing that you're going through. It's this cycle that you're experiencing that kind of leads to, you know, maybe needing to have a conversation about seeking therapy.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, Kai, because I think it's important to look at these things, like I said earlier, in threes, or look at them as a group. So you don't want to say, oh, I'm not eating, something's wrong. You want to be able to say, okay, this is an actual syndrome. These are like a series of symptoms I need to pay attention to.
And then irritability, I always struggle with that word, and argumentativeness.
Yes.
Again, and this goes back to, you know, when someone is kind of showing up, as you said, kind of like the Scrooge, or being very a little maybe combative. It's like, let's dig deeper to see what is really going on, because not everyone is going to cry, right? Not everyone's going to react to grief differently.
Absolutely. Yeah, you might get somebody who's reacting to grief who's extraordinarily angry. I'll use myself as an example again. Some of my family members were extraordinarily hostile, and there was really no reason to be hostile, but I think it's the pain of the loss, and it's trying to imagine, how am I going to live life now without this person? You know, how am I going to imagine a future without this person? And then when you hit the holidays, then you're really faced with trying to figure out, how am I going to live life without this person? So I think you can see a lot of hostility and anger around this time because of that.
Yeah. And do you think when you're going through this of the loss, and, you know, when you said like that bargaining of, you know, if I do this, then, you know, maybe there'll be a different result. Could any of the experience be too that someone is, when they're just trying to cope and manage and understand what has just happened, like, could I have done something differently? Like, could I have done whatever it is to try to come in, even though it was something that was out of their control? But does that play into those different points of maybe that feeling of, I should have done more?
100%. If we go back to the beginning of COVID and we look at some of the news reports where there were certain individuals being interviewed by various, news agencies. They were, one lady I saw, she was explaining the loss of her father in a hospital. And as you know, with COVID, we haven't had the opportunity to go into hospitals like we normally could. So, a loved one being in the hospital, in the intensive care unit, possibly dying at this time of year, is just traumatic in and of itself. But, I've heard individuals in a situation like that ask themselves, could I have done something better to contribute to that person's health or to prevent them from dying? Or could I have gotten a higher level of care, a higher level of intervention to prevent that death? So that might be part of the re-experiencing again as well, being met with those thoughts of, is there anything I could have done to prevent the death? Or is there anything I could have done to make things less painful? I've seen a lot of individuals, and I have some families in my practice as well. They've lost loved ones to COVID. And the number one question they've brought to me is, how could I have done something better? And that's unnecessary guilt that they are placing upon themselves. It's a form of pain. That's the best way to explain it. That's kind of, I think, how they're coping by asking themselves, is there anything I could have done better?
Yeah. And I will say, sharing a personal story, my mom, she actually had COVID. She was diagnosed in April of this year, and she has underlying health conditions. And this was probably one of the toughest things
Yes.
You know, fortunately, you know, she's on the road to recovery. It's been a long,
Mhm.
long road. But it has to be one of the most challenging things because, first of all, the distance where we live in different states. And like I said, she has a lot of underlying health conditions and everything's out of your control. It's not as though even if I went up to visit, I could go in the hospital and check on her just to make sure, you know, you always, for your parents, there's like extra care. Like this pillow needs to be fluffed a little bit more, right? You just want to make sure that
Yes.
they're really being tended to and not
Yes.
just kind of, um, you know, I don't
Mishandled.
want to take it away.
Mishandled.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it was so challenging just kind of giving all of my trust really to doctors, to nurses who I didn't know and, you know, and think like they're taking good care of her. And there's always in the back of my head, should I be doing more? Maybe there's some way I can get into the hospital. You
Yes.
know, and so, you know, that was just, and that caused me to like stay up at night because I'm thinking like I should be doing more. Am I doing enough? So of course, when there is a situation where there is a loss of a loved one, you know, that questioning always comes up, but we always just have to extend grace to ourselves. And, you know, we can only do so much, right? And everything is not in our control.
And I love that kind. We do have to extend grace to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of a counseling term or a clinical term for that, and it's self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what we're doing. We're extending that grace to ourselves. I love that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're so hard on ourselves. And even, you know, another thought came to me when we were talking is allowing yourself to heal. I wonder if there's any thought that some people have, like, if I allow myself to heal from this loss, does that mean something negative? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
100%. And yes, and I have seen this over my 12-year career working with individuals who are struggling with trauma, that they will usually say, if I heal, I have forgotten
Mm-hmm.
either where I've come from, I've forgotten the person I've lost, I have forgotten everything. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there's often a tug of war within ourselves. We want to heal because the pain is so hard, and
Mm-hmm.
yet we don't want to heal because we still want to hold on. We still want to hold on to that loved one. I mean, I have to say, even as a psychotherapist, I feel like I should have a certain level of self-awareness to where I don't go there, but I went there. And I said that to myself in July. I
Mm-hmm.
said, I don't want to do something as simple as close my grandmother's estate, because then I'm saying goodbye, and
Yeah.
I'm not ready to do that. So um, even, you know, closing that loved one's property down, closing their estate, walking out of the hospital. I'm hugely grateful for the hospital that let me go in
Mm-hmm.
while my grandmother was getting very, very sick. Just walking out of the hospital was saying goodbye. I didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of ways that we can really try to hold on. And you're right, Kai. One way to do that is, you know, simply to say, I don't want to heal. Why
Mm-hmm.
heal? Because I want to still hold on, even though
Yeah.
it's painful.
Even right. And because that reminds me of in the book, The Body Keeps the Score. There was a story of a gentleman that had served, I think, in Vietnam.
Yes.
And so he had, you know, came back from war and he was trying to kind of get back into family life, and it was very challenging for him. He was having nightmares and just all different type of experience, suffering from PTSD.
Yes.
And so the gentleman, the author is
Oh
oh
man,
my
you would have to
gosh,
bring it up because I don't remember.
I can't remember the author, but the author that was
Oh,
actually his client.
yeah.
And so he was saying how, you know, his thought was, okay, I have to try to get him well. So they were talking about different therapies that they could give to him. And so he said, you know, and also medication. So it's like, you know, take this medication. But the problem is that, I shouldn't say problem, but the gentleman had explained that if he began to heal, then he was leaving all of his fellow soldiers who had died and not me. And so him suffering, he felt that helped him continue that connection to those soldiers. And it wasn't as though like he left them out on the field by themselves suffering. It's as though like I'm still gonna go through this experience of suffering because that helps me to connect to you, and it helps that guilt that I survived. Oh, yeah. And I thought that was just so powerful and so deep that he preferred to stay in that pain because of that guilt that he had of moving forward. And what does that mean? That means I really have left the fallen soldiers behind. Exactly what you said.
Yeah, I think it's Dr. Vanderkult.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank God for Google. Where's the camera?
Right?
There we go. I love it.
I'm going to butcher that, and someone's going to say, I don't think that's how you say that at all.
I was Googling. I was looking at you, but I was Googling.
I was like, I don't remember I don't know if that's right.
Vanderkult. Yeah.
Yes.
He's an expert in the field of trauma. So I'm so glad you brought that up. He's great.
Mm-hmm. And so the other point, regression and symptoms of specific mental illness, and we kind of touched a little bit about the PTSD, but also bipolar. Can you share with us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you already have a mental health condition like bipolar disorder, sometimes schizophrenia, additional grief and loss and stress can actually cause symptoms to pop back up. So if you've healed from mania, for example, or you've healed from depression, or let's say you have schizophrenia and you've healed from kind of like a delusional thought pattern, or you're hearing and seeing things and you've healed from that, that grief and loss can actually cause you to regress because of the amount of stress that your body is trying to tolerate. You know, if you think about a pressure cooker, you know, and it's boiling on the stove and you put the top on it, you know, the water's kind of pushing the top up. That's kind of what happens when we experience stress and we already have a condition. It really worsens the condition depending on how you react to that stress.
Wow. And, you know, again, I just have to say, we have people that are kind of, that are joining in. If you have any questions, comments, please be sure to drop it in the chat and I'll make sure that I bring it up. And, you know, this is, like we said in the beginning, it's a very sensitive topic. And so even sometimes listening to this, folks that are watching, maybe you just have to kind of sit with it and just kind of think it through because a lot of times we don't really have those safe spaces that we can go to and share. So, you know, if that is the case where you're kind of listening and just kind of absorbing, that's fine as well. And then if you do leave any comments later, then we can, you know, I'll go back through and then we'll see, I'll direct you to Tamara's website. So that way, you know, she always provides great information, especially on her YouTube channel, which I will put that in the chat box as well. Because I know that the information that you have done about like dealing with narcissist family members or anything like that. So that's all important information. And a lot of times there's not really spaces that we can have honest dialogue. So I'm thankful for that. And we have Queen Neff. She is joining us. Hello, Queen Neff. So thank you so much. So we kind of talked about the signs that, you know, there may be something there that definitely need some therapy to start having those conversations. And there's nothing wrong with therapy, right? There's nothing wrong with going and saying, listen, I get angry every holiday season. I don't know why. You know, have that conversation with someone that can help you unpack that.
Yes.
So now we're going to talk about resiliency. And so one way that you said that you can improve your resiliency, your psychological well-being, is to engage in self-care. So we always hear self-care, right? I think that's like a buzzword right now. But what does that mean? What does that look like for you when you're working with one of your clients?
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned clients, because I have one client and she's like holding her phone and then she's like drinking her water and she's like a baby in this hand. She's like, I'm engaging in self-care. I swear. I have my shoes off, my feet are propped up. And I'm like, no, that's not it. That's not it. You're multitasking. So yeah. So self-care is basically this. It's intentionality. It's intentionally making yourself do something that's going to take your functionality from here to here. So it's not just going to go get a pedicure and then, hey, it's over. It's getting a pedicure, really taking your time to process what's going on, really engaging in the experience, and then leaving and going home to go take a long bath, go eat healthy, and go to bed. That's self-care, not holding your phone and like having your feet propped up. You know what I mean? Like that's not enough. So self-care, I need to take my own advice, is really a great tool.
Yeah, because nowadays, and anyone's listening, please let me know if you've experienced this, when you go to get your like mani-pedi, sometimes the news is on. Like they'll have like the 24-hour news cycle station. So you're definitely not going to be able to relax and unwind with that type of thing playing. We do have Lightbird did have a question. My sister, since her pregnancy, has been experiencing depression type thoughts and bipolar type of behavior. I'm in support of holistic health. What should I suggest to her aside from just therapy? Well, this is what, I mean, let's say, so I can say from like a yoga lens, and then Tamara, I would definitely want to know how, because I know that you also do a lot of holistic work as well. So I, as a yoga teacher, I think the big thing is, for her to have that conversation with her therapist about what could work best. And then maybe if she has a couple ideas, if it's yoga, meditation, or something like that, maybe have that conversation with her therapist to say, hey, these are a couple of things that I'm thinking about. Is this something that we can dive in deeper to and maybe add to my care plan? Anything you want to add to that?
Sure. I would suggest vitamin therapy. I think vitamin therapy is really good for pregnancy. And I would have her check with her PCP, her primary care physician, just to make sure. But I want to recommend a company that has been huge for me. I'm not pregnant, just putting that out there, but it's been huge for me. I love the vitamin. You can do, it's the prenatal vitamins through Rainbow Light. Rainbow, Light, and you can get them from Target. And they are fantastic. They are very good for really controlling mood and keeping you balanced. So that's one way you can go.
Awesome. Thank you. Right on time with the self-care topic. I suggested this to her, but she's slow to dive deeper. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing too. A lot of times we will do for others more than we'll do for ourselves. Like we will share with others, practice your self-care, do what you have to do, turn off the TV, and then we're still, we're not doing that at all. So I think it's always easier to share that information with others. It's harder to apply it to ourselves. So hopefully though, you can share this episode with her, and then, maybe that could be helpful. Because sometimes I realize that sometimes if someone close to you is sharing information, it's received differently than complete strangers.
True. So true. Yeah, or the reverse.
Yes, exactly. And so the other thing you mentioned is to educate yourself. Again, this is part of your resiliency and to improve your resiliency and your psychological well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I think self-education is powerful. It's, again, like what I said earlier, it's only when you develop that personal insight, that's when you can work your way towards healing. So educating yourself, getting books, getting information, going online, doing podcasts like Kai's wonderful podcast, going to YouTube channels, absolutely. Going to Twitter, like scrolling through. All of that is self-knowledge. So build your personal insight. You can get to healing a little faster.
Yes. And with that being said, I am going to put your YouTube in the chat box so that people can go and subscribe. And I'll do that while the next way that you can improve your resiliency is through removing obstacles. I like that.
I have a bunch of those. Yes. Yes. You know what? Sometimes that obstacle is just your mindset.
Yes.
You know, wake up in the morning, look around. The first thing you say is, why? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Do I have to get up? That's an obstacle. So, sometimes changing your mindset and reframing and restructuring it is removing that obstacle. Another obstacle would be unhealthy, toxic people in your world, whether that's a family member or a friend. So kind of distancing from them. That's an obstacle, having someone who's just not healthy to be around. And another obstacle could be something as simple as your own mood, your own level of irritability, like getting that out of the way, taking vitamins, getting sleep, going to your doctor, getting a therapist. You're moving that obstacle out of the way so you can heal, you can move forward.
Now, question for you, when we are talking about moving obstacles, could that be, because sometimes it could be family, right? If you are on your healing path and there's certain people that it's like, when I'm around you, it's just a toxic environment. Now that can be challenging during the holidays, right? If you're trying to heal, move forward, and you have maybe a family member that is early on in their journey of healing, we'll put it that way. So do you have any recommendations on how that may work for someone? Like, is it to limit their time at the family function, or how should they handle a situation like that?
I think it just depends on the dynamics of your family. So let's say, for example, if you're dealing with a grief and a loss, and you know that family dynamic is entrenched in conflict and, really bad emotion. So emotion dysregulation, and there's no boundaries. And I think the number one thing you should do is distance yourself. And then after that, slowly distance until you can build those proper boundaries. Because family, I think, because family is so close, they can actually be an obstacle to your healing. So sometimes it's really good. They can also be an added feature to your healing process as well. But I'm talking about those unhealthy family members. They can really be an obstacle. So it's really good to put that boundary and say, I'm going to distance myself by kind of building some space around myself, not visiting as often. My email structure is going to be different with you. My texting is going to be different with you. So like building boundaries as you go during the holiday, you can do that also. You don't have to be so lovey-dovey. You can slowly start to build those boundaries back.
And that's also practicing your self-care. Right? That's what all of this is building right on top of each other. So self-care doesn't have to go out and be a thing that you're doing, like buying something or having some type of service. It could literally just be you setting up those boundaries, establishing those healthy boundaries with family.
Absolutely. Yes.
And then the next you have is stay in your lane. What's that one about?
Oh, I love that. So I think that was something that fell divinely down from heaven for me years ago. Because, I think my biggest stressor growing up was, how do I find me? This was when I was like mid to late 20s. I'm like, how do I find me? And I'm looking at other people's lives, and I'm like, maybe I should be that. Well, maybe I should be, oh, that's cool. And I lost perspective. And so staying in your lane is really an awesome metaphor. Again, I think that divinely fell from the sky for me and kind of like said, look, wake up. You need to focus on you and focus on your purpose and focus on your direction and your calling, then move forward from there. So staying in your lane, don't look that way or that way. Stay focused. That's really what that means.
I like that. And, when you have lost a loved one, it can be really where you just feel kind of out of sorts all over the place. And your sense of purpose, maybe that could even have been impacted by that loss. And so, maybe on someone's journey, maybe that could be a way to kind of remember that person, right? By their life inspiring you to live out your purpose. So could you also look at as a healing part of one's healing in that type of fashion, as in maybe now discovering that purpose, that's your way of honoring or remembering that person that you've lost?
Oh my God, yes, that is wonderful. I'm so glad you said that. My cousin told me that the other day. We text back and forth, and I think she's watching tonight too. But she said something to me that was wonderful, and it kind of put a spark in my heart. She says, "Make your grandmother proud." She's like, "Make her proud," and I'm like, "Oh, that makes sense." So I think you're right. I think you can utilize that loss as a way, and this metaphor as a way to say, you know what? I think this is the direction my lost loved one will want me to go in. So I think I'm going to keep focusing forward. No looking that way, no looking that way. I'm staying forward.
Yeah, I like, because then it's as though, because when we talked before about when you start to move forward, maybe someone feeling that, oh my gosh, if I move forward, if I begin to heal, I'm going to lose them. But this is almost like you're taking them with you on this journey. So they're with you through all of that. So I like how you said that. And then you said, take time off. That's something that we really don't know how to do. So true. How do we even do that?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out myself. I really am. I think, Kai, we've tied our value system into how productive we are, as opposed to realizing that if there's any such thing, over productivity can actually lead to burnout. Like, you know, if you're engaging so much that you don't know who you really are, that's a problem. You know, so I really think that we need to like pump the brakes and pause. How to do that, I think, really just depends on the structure of your life and what you're hoping to achieve moving forward. For me, it's stop answering the phone. You know, that's me. Stop answering emails, you know, Kai. For other people, it may be setting those boundaries with family. We're not going to visit each other every Friday. I'm sorry, I love you, but I also need this time. So I think looking at the structure of your life and your goals, and then go from there.
I like that, because, you know, it made me think of when you had to take time off, that some people, if they have experienced loss, they could have thrown themselves into work as their way of coping. And so if now you're on that healing path, you know, taking time off may mean now you're actually finally grieving. And so that comes with a whole set of, you know, a range of emotions, especially, you know, like our whole concept or topic today is around the holidays. But maybe it's, you know what, usually you work during the holiday season, but it's like, you know what, I'm taking time off, and that could maybe be a time that you can actually start to grieve.
I agree, Pat. I think some people work to get, like you said, to escape the pain. But I actually think sometimes that prolongs the grieving process, because you're not pausing long enough to process what you're feeling and thinking. You're also not pausing long enough to process how life will be for you now that you've lost that person. So you're prolonging that healing process by adding these defense mechanisms in there to prevent the pain.
Wow, that's heavy, because it makes me think about that old saying that time heals all wounds, and you know that's so not the case.
Yes, I agree.
And so next we have embrace and accept being alone. Wow, share with us about that step.
Yeah, I used to say to my mom all the time, and I think she holds a grudge against me, Kai, because of this. I used to tell her all the time. I used to say, Mom, we're ultimately alone. And she's like, no, we're not. We have this and this. And I'm like, Mom, we're ultimately alone. Like, if you think about it, I mean, we can't be with people 24/7. That's unrealistic. We're going to be alone with our thoughts. We're going to be alone with our feelings, our emotions. You know, when we're experiencing pain in our body and our heart and our mind, we're going down that path and that journey all alone. We may have somebody externally who will hold our hand and say things to us that can heal our heart, But ultimately, we have to sit with that within ourselves. And so learning to be okay with that is key, because the moment we try to push that away or avoid it, we're not healing that way. We're now using defense mechanisms. So learning to sit with being alone and learning to embrace those emotions and thoughts that come with that is key.
Yeah, and you know, in our society today, we're always kind of in something, whether it be social media or just kind of some type of engagement. So that alone and just kind of being with yourself, with your own thoughts, for many folks, that can be very scary because we're constantly being bombarded by messages, images. And so, but I think that it's so important on your healing journey to have that sense of taking time for yourself, because that's the way that you can heal, you can grow, discover passions, discover purpose. I think that's so important. And Lightbird says, sounds like my mom.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so pursue psychotherapy that is specialized. So share with us about that. And for those that are listening, I think, you know, if you're thinking at this point, like, yes, therapy, I'm definitely interested in. I haven't grieved. The holiday seasons, I hate them, or I find them very challenging. So I think this will definitely kind of speak to that as well.
Absolutely. I think some people feel if I just dial a therapist's phone number, that's the therapist. And I think it's important to understand we are not created the same. You know, a lot of therapists have what's called a theoretical orientation. That's really another word, a professional word for worldview. And we see life very differently, and we pull personal experience into our skill set sometimes. We're not alike. I mean, we're just not. We're all different. And so to call a specialist really says this. It says, I know you are specialized and you've been trained in a certain area. I know you're going to help me improve in this area. If you call just any therapist, you're likely to have a therapist sit there with you and just try to help you. But if you contact a specialist, you know for sure that that's the person that you should be with. Now, I also encourage you, you know, on the flip side of that, to really kind of intuitively sense, does this therapist know what they're talking about? Or are they coming from a script? Because if they are, you know, practicing what they're going to say to their clients every time they come through the door, then that's a real big issue, despite what degrees you have on the wall. So specialist is great, but also intuitively really discerning, does this person know what they're doing?
Right. Because you want to be able to build a relationship with that person that you can trust them and open up to them. So if you have all these reservations, then it probably would be best to look for a different therapist.
Specialist.
Yeah. And so we also have on here, consider medication as a last resort. And I know that can be a very touchy topic for people. So can you walk us through that a little bit, and just so that we can kind of, because usually when we talk about medication, we see what's on television, the commercials, and that can kind of scare people off. But then it does have its benefits. So can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And hope no one logs off the podcast because because I've done live YouTubes, and as soon as I mention medication, I see my people dropping. I'm like, no, I'm not going to put you on drugs. I promise. I'm just suggesting that, you know, if you have all of those physiological symptoms we talked about, Kai, at the very beginning of the show, if you have that increased heart rate, those racing thoughts, that depression, even suicidal thoughts, if you are saying, you know, I want to go with my loved one, I lost them and I want to die too, that's when you need to pause and say, okay, this pain is a little bit deeper than I thought. I think I'm going to need something to help me. And it could be temporary. It could be as short as 3 months, 6 months. It could be as short as therapy, so that you can have both medication and therapy at the same time. And it could be something that could really stabilize you for years. So I think medication has a huge taboo because our medical field has overused it. So people are scared to death when you start mentioning medication. They're afraid of addiction and that kind of thing, or being used as like what am I trying to say? Like what's the word, Kai? For guinea pig. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
Yeah, some people are afraid of that. Like, I'm not going to try your medication so you can just see if this is going to work. But I think, again, if you approach it in a conservative fashion with a balanced mindset, it can be helpful.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the point that you raised about if you're working with a specialist, about building that relationship of trust with them so that you know that they have your best interest and they understand maybe if you have concerns about medications and can walk you through, if there are side effects, what to expect. So that way you don't feel as though, drugs, if you will, are just being pushed on you, but everything is explained to you in a manner that makes you feel safe and that can maybe help you get your life back on track. So, I know we like to kind of stay away from medication, but sometimes it is necessary and we shouldn't feel any shame if that's something that you have to do. And so next we have fill your time productively. What's that about?
Yeah, I think sometimes we can sit with so much grief and so many feelings of loss and sadness that we just sit there in that grief and sadness and it turns into depression. So we don't want to do that. We want to be able to be productive in that moment where we're sitting. So reading things that can educate and soothe you, really doing some introspection through journaling, sleeping in a healthy fashion. I often tell my adolescent clients, when you're sad and you're depressed, it's okay to nap. I think that's like a turbocharge that you need, but don't sleep for 6 hours straight. Try to sleep for maybe a half hour to an hour and then get up. I know some people are thinking, oh, I can't sleep that short. And I totally get that. So an hour to an hour and a half for naps, or maybe a little bit close to 2 hours. But feeling that time productively, not just sitting in that grief.
Yeah, that's so important. And finding ways just to kind of keep you active. And that doesn't mean you're not dealing with it or processing it. That just makes sure of what you said earlier, that you're taking care of your mental health. And so that's so important, especially during this time. And then the last step that you provided here, or method, I should say, to help improve your resiliency and well-being, don't ignore your spiritual needs. Yes, I love it.
Yes, don't do that. I think trying to deal with especially death, which is an enigma, right? Like, where do we go when that happens? And why can't we stop that process? And like all of those questions, and will I ever see you again? And, if you ignore that spiritual side of everything, then you're missing a big component. At least for me, one thing that has helped me is my faith in God. That's I think the only thing that has given me courage to just continue on and have the strength to manage my own emotions. So embracing that, and then embracing that this is a spiritual experience, the death and loss process. So you have to embrace that so you can understand it.
No, I totally agree. And when you had that listed, it made me think of different ways to remember that person remember their spirit, and however, that works for whoever is listening. Maybe it's for you doing like an ancestral altar and kind of putting that together. And maybe that means in the morning you spend time with those people that you've lost, maybe a meditation, maybe a prayer. So it's finding those things you can do to keep you connected to them. And so, it's going to look different for everybody. So just use that time to explore and see what would work best for you.
Absolutely. I agree.
So I'm just looking in the comments if anybody has any questions. I know that we went over our time, but I just wanted to make sure that we got through all those points, because I think they were very important. And if anybody has any questions really quick, they can drop them in the chat. But I want to be respectful of time because I know it's getting late. It's past my bedtime.
I wish I could say that. My bedtime is 3 a.m. Kai.
Oh no! Oh my gosh! I wouldn't be able to function. Maybe
I should correct that. It's 3 a.m. on the weekends. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Because my mind is like, okay, what do I need to do next? What do I need to? Yeah.
And Queen says mine too. Yeah.
Yes.
So it is hard because there's so much going on. It's hard to turn off. So one thing I do want to share, what has worked for me to kind of turn off my mind and help me to kind of relax, if this is helpful for anyone. I do try to set a certain time that I get off of laptop and phone. That is challenging, right? Because usually what happens when we lay in bed, so that's hard. Yes. But the other thing is I have warm almond milk with cinnamon, maple syrup, and a dash of cayenne pepper. I don't know what that does, but it knocks me out.
Like a baby, right?
Yes. And Queen Neff says, yeah, CBD oil. Queen Neff, she has a dispensary owner. She sells the CBD oil that works as well. So if no one has any questions, I will close our episode today. I want to thank Tamara so much for coming on the podcast, providing us your expertise on what we can do to get through the holiday season, and not only get through it, but go on a healing journey, build resiliency, practice our self-care. So I really appreciate you coming on. And for those that are listening, how can people reach out to you? I did put your YouTube channel in the chat, but if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yes, absolutely. Kai, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very grateful for that. And I'm glad we can add some laughter too. Like I feel like that was very helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much. The best way to contact me would be, thank you very much. Is it Fatima?
Yes.
I'm so distractible, but thank you, Fatima. It's so sweet of you. The best way to contact me would be my website, anchoredinKnowledge.com, www.
Awesome. And now they're coming to an end. Is there any other closing words that you wanted to leave anybody with tonight?
Sure. I think I'll just speak from my heart and just briefly say, this is a really hard time for everyone. So don't be hard on yourself if you're struggling with, weight that you've gained, if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, if you're struggling with self-esteem, uncertainty, finances, that is okay. Make sure that you're showing yourself some self-compassion because it's a very, very hard time that we're all in, and we're all in this together. Like if you look to your left, look to your right, we're all experiencing some pain this year. So just show yourself some self-compassion, and it's okay. We're going to get through it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. And for everyone watching, if you would like to learn more about my services, please visit KaiMarie.com and also the Healing Element Podcast YouTube channel as well. And with that being said, we will close out our broadcast tonight. And Tamara, I will end this broadcast and then we'll kind of go into the green rooms if you could hang out for one moment. So thank you guys so much and have a great holiday season.